Welcome back to the series on coaching managers and supervisors. My name is Sandy Mojican, and like in the first two sessions, I'll be the presenter for the day. Session number 3 is going to be covering the dreaded corrective actions. For the last two sessions, we have talked about what it takes to be a manager, what it takes to remain as a manager, and how to handle conflict. And now we will be talking about the steps that we need to take when the employee is not being productive and or helpful. So as you can tell by the graphics, it says the boss, the supervisor, is asking the employee, "Why are you not working?" And the employee answers, "I didn't know you were coming." Very simple. So one of the things that we're going to be noticing on this session is going to be that there are two types of corrective action. There is the performance corrective action, and there is disciplinary action, which is going to be in regards to misconduct. So just think about it. So the supervisor asks the employee, "Why are you not working?" The employee simply answers, "I didn't know you were coming." So would that be a sign of misconduct and it's going to be under disciplinary action? Or that's more than anything a corrective action, but on the performance portion of it? So as we go along, we're going to find out which one this specific scenario will belong to. So before we continue, I want to give you a quick anecdote. So years ago, I'm going to keep using the examples of the bank. As I was being trained to be an assistant manager and then a manager, one of the things that came up is in one of the training meetings, the district manager, the district manager, myself, and the manager. And the district manager asked me, "Okay, so you are coaching an employee. You tell, and they don't do the work. So tell me, how does that work? How do you coach an employee?" So the first step is going to be, you talk to the employee, you figure out what it is, and you present a solution. So the district manager jumps and says, "Okay, fine. Let's say that you find something, you give them something, and it doesn't work. Then what?" Then you approach, that was me now, you approach the person again, you find out what is happening, and you coach them again. And the district manager comes up again and says, "Okay, fine, you did that. You did it a second time, it doesn't work. You did it a third time, it doesn't work. Then what do you do?" And at that point, I said the same thing 3 times. Obviously, it wasn't working. It wasn't what they were expecting me to say. So I'll tell you as we go along, so you could follow with the presentation and you see what happens with this. So you guys, corrective action has 2 main sections. It's going to be performance and it's going to be misconduct in this case. So the objectives for this session is going to be understanding what is corrective actions on the performance side of it and what is corrective action on the disciplinary side of it. By the time we finish here, my goal is for you guys to know the differences, to know pretty much what they mean first. Once you know what they are, what they're actually covering, the idea is that you're going to know how they're different. They're there are areas that they overlap, that they're very similar. So the idea is that you're going to know how similar they are, how different they are, and how to apply them. What is their application, how they actually work. So that's going to be nice and simple. Okay, so corrective action is going to be, let's talk about the performance portion. As you can see on the table, I separated it into columns. I put corrective action, performance portion of it, and disciplinary action, the misconduct. They are all under the title of corrective action. The only difference, one is performance-based, the other one is conduct or disciplinary. I further divided into 2 additional steps. One of them is going to be the informal, or what I call their phase 1, or the formal portion of them. They both have the same. And if you notice, they pretty much have the exact same steps for both the performance and the misconduct or the disciplinary. So what is the big deal or the big difference if everything is the same? Well, the big difference is going to be that you're looking at 2 separate things. So here is where the differences, the definitions and the similarities and the differences, everything kind of mixes together. So how they're similar? Well, they pretty much they're asking sort of the same questions. They're trying to get to the same point on getting something that is not working to work or to improve it. How they are different is that what they're looking to improve is two different things. One is going to be the performance and the other one is the behavior, which at the same time, they overlap because it could be the behaviors that is not allowing the performance to take place. So you're going to see as we go on how they could sort of overlap each other, but at the same time they're different if you ask the right questions and you observe correctly. So that's going to be one of the main things that we need to keep an eye on what is the problem. Is it performance or is it behavior? And behavior in this case, I'll use it from time to time, but we're talking about disciplinary action for behavior. All right, so let's tackle the first one. It's going to be corrective action, performance portion on the phase 1, step 1. What does that mean? That is going to be the very first thing that you need to do to find when you notice that there is a problem. So what does that mean? Before you confront the employee, you need to have the facts and be sure to understand the portions of the performance that is under the employee's control. What I mean with that is, if there is an issue with performance, before you even tell the employee, hey, there is an issue here, you need to understand or have a general idea, ideally very specific idea of what the problem is. So the first thing that you need to do is you have to diagnose the problem. Now, to diagnose a problem, there are different ways that you could go around to doing it. So the easiest, the way of doing it and the less complicated one, as we mentioned in session 2, is going to be to observe and gather the data. Now on session 2, the way that we describe observe, it was as simple as going to a corner of the office where you have a view of the person that in this case you are trying to gauge their performance, and you're going to just watch. You're not going to interact with anyone. Your sole purpose of being at that moment is to observe and gather the data. Once you have this data, you're going to compare those observations that you made against what you were expecting or the expectations of the position that that person is holding. Now, if the person works at a law firm and their single purpose is to answer the phone, your observation is going to be very simple. You're going to be watching the person answer the phone, where they're greeting the person, the caller, where they're introducing themselves, if they're following the steps, and then you confront the person. Now, what I mean is, if the person answers the phone and says, "This is ABC lawyer, how can I help you?" Okay, so you're going to compare that to maybe the written script that you have for that position, that it includes saying the name of the firm, first saying good morning, good afternoon, whatever it's going to be, saying the name of the firm, saying the person's name that is actually answering the phone, and then how may I help you? Now, that will be just the beginning. That will be just the observing and gathering the data. Once you observe and gather the data, you can have a pretty good idea of what that specific issue is. So the next thing is you compare it. Once you compare it, you know, hey, there are some mismatches here, things are not matching. Then you look for possible causes. Okay, why is the person not saying all the script? If we have been trained, or you train them, that's something else that is coming later on. If you have trained them, that's a requirement for the position. Now, to look for possible causes, depending on what the issue is, it may be very easy to find, or it may not. If it's, let's say, the person that is answering the phones, it's going to be very simple. Listen to them. If they're not following the things because they're rushing, that could be one of the causes. If they're just taking their time and they're not in a hurry, but they don't really care, you're going to tell. You could potentially notice when they're talking and to see how engaged they are in the conversation. But at this point, you're not saying anything. You're just taking notes and making sure that you see the possible problems that you may have. The next, because you could have some biases against the person that you are doing this observation, it's always a good idea, if possible, if you have someone that could do it for you, to do the same first two steps, to observe the person and to compare it to what you give them as the baseline. So in this case, let's say that you are one of the managers. Oh, try to get another one. If the office has two, let's say an operations manager and a sales manager, you get the other one, and they tell, hey, by the way, could you do this for me? Ideally, if they don't work together, even better. So that way they are the least amount of biases possible against the person. Because if you think there is already a problem, once you do this observation, you're going to find anything and everything that you could see as a problem, even if it's not there, because you're already expecting to find a problem. So that's when you get a second set of eyes and ears. They do their own thing, you're not present. Once they finish, they give you a little report. It could be a written one, to be formal, or just an informal, hey, this is what I found, this is what I think. And then you compare it to your own findings. Depending on the findings, pretty much when you compare your stuff with their stuff, you could see what the issue is. If all your findings are correct, if there are things that you need to ask additional questions. So you put all the findings together, and then that's when you get to a conclusion as to what you believe the problem is. So this is going to be the portion of phase one, step one, just gathering information, diagnosing the problem. Okay, as we continue with phase one of the performance on corrective action, we move on to step number two. Now in step number two, you're actually going to be talking to the person that you were diagnosing the issue on step one. But now this is the thing. You don't want to be doing all this stuff, all these observations and preparing all this work behind the scenes. And then all of a sudden you show up one day and you tell the person, hey, we need to talk. And then right then and there, you start talking with the person. And what you could do is you're definitely not going to tell them ahead of time, I'm going to be observing you, because then they're going to behave differently. And then that's not the point. But what you are going to do is once you do finish your observation and you finish the step one, you're going to tell, hey, by the way, on such and such day, even if it's going to be the next day, on such and such day, we are going to meet to talk about your performance. If you have anything that could help for the conversation, bring it. Nothing crazy. You're not going to go into any details at that point. You're just going to let them know in advance they're going to be having a conversation with them in regards to their performance. The issue for this is you don't really want to surprise the employee. What if when you talk to them and you present your potential issues that you found, they could say something back to you, oh, that's true, but this is the reason. Now, if you gave them enough time, they might be able to have brought something to the conversation, which is the second part. You have to show them, you have to talk to the employee, and you have to tell them, okay, these are the expectations of your positions. Just tell them what you are expected to do, and this is what I observe. Now, if it matches, then there shouldn't be a problem, and they shouldn't be having the conversation in the first place. But if there is a difference, then that conversation is to move on to the next phase or to the next portion of it. It says, okay, why do we have this difference? Show the employee your observations. Show them what you found. Now, you have to keep this to the facts. Don't make stuff that you didn't really find. You have to just keep it to what you actually saw. Or let's say that you found it to the other person when you were talking, the other manager that did the observation. You may not want to bring that person into the conversation since they were not directly manager. You could say, as part of the management observations, this is what we found. So you have to just keep it to what you saw. Don't complicate it, because sometimes those biases come up in the sense that you are influenced by someone else's, I don't want to say nemesis, but if the employee that you are focusing your attention on to do the observation has a coworker that they are not liked by them, if that person happens to be your friend or you spend more time with them, they may influence your view of the employee that you are observing without you even noticing. So that's why we have to get a second observer to sort of balance it out. And that's why you are going to give it to the facts. Not what that person told you that something was, no, just keep it to what you saw and just talk to the person. Now, the most important part here in this little section right now, on the step 2, is that you have to listen to the employee, what they have to say. Understand what the employee is talking about and make sure that they understand their responsibilities in the position. Now, if the employee starts talking and giving reasons as to what they're doing it, you have to find out, are they taking responsibility for their actions if there were problems, or are they deflecting the concerns or the problems to someone else? How does that sound? Okay, so you tell them, why didn't you answer the phone the way that we trained you for? Oh no, you never trained me. Oh, I didn't know what to do. You never told me to do. Okay, but you have been doing this for a while. So you have to figure out if the blame is really on the employee for not knowing because they were not trained, or whether they were trained but they are not willing to do the work. Now, there are a couple of things when you're doing this type of conversations here. Now, is it a knowledge problem, or is it a will? Is it that I don't know how to do it because I really don't know, no one really ever told me, or is it because I'm not willing to do it? Now, if it is because no one really trained the person to do something, which is now causing a problem, well, that is not really in the control of the employee if they were never really told what to do. So on that one, the manager may have to take ownership on those issues. But if the employee knows the information, they have been trained on multiple occasions, and they still are not making the effort to actually make it work, then that's a will problem, and then there may be another steps that you may be needing to take. Now, one of the things that is going to happen once you listen to the employee and they give you something, you have to make suggestions or you have to request for things to happen. So if the employee says, oh, I just didn't do it, I was running around, I didn't have enough time, I was in a rush. Okay, so at that point, some of the suggestions or requests that you might be able to give the employees, okay, only worry for the customer, the client, the co-worker that you have in front of you at a time. So dedicate the time that you need in order to do that. Now, for the people on the phone, just to keep using the same example, a simple way will be to say the line that you have to open with, and they say, could you give me a second? Come back on the phone after you finish with the next person, and that way everyone is attended. It could get a little out of hand, but with enough practice, that should work, and that's the key portion of it. Practice and giving the employee enough time to actually practice. But you do have to hold them accountable if you have given them the training and they still haven't delivered the results. Once you have done this part, the next portion will be to check for agreement. Now, there are a couple of ways that you could do that. You could straight up ask the person, do you agree with this observation, with these changes that you need to make? And the other one will be a more subtle way of doing it. Do you understand that there are some things that need to change? Regardless to which way you ask the question, the answer, hopefully, for the employee is going to be yes, that they agree with it. Now, once that is done, you're going to record the interaction. As you were doing all the paperwork, you're going to record the interaction for future reference. And the most important thing is you're going to follow up. Now, this process, this phase 1 that I'm referring here to performance, I put phase 1, step 1, step 2. This is not a thing that is going to take, this is not a process that is going to take 3 days to do, not a week. This is supposed to be more of an informal way of doing this. Now, if you remember, when we were talking about the phase 1 for corrective action, I put it as informal. Now, the steps for this is the performance improvement plan, a verbal warning, and the letter of expectations. Now, the reason that I said that you don't have to spend, you shouldn't spend a whole week just on this little section of phase one is because a verbal warning, a letter of expectations, or performance improvement from PIP should be something relatively simple that you could do because it's going to be informal in nature. Now, in some places, they do consider a PIP or performance improvement plan as a next step, as something more formal. Now, depending on your organization, that could be the case. But just look at it this way. Let's give the example of the performance improvement plan. You already talked to the person, you did your diagnosing of the problem, you found out what the issue is, you talked to the person. You could do that all in one day. And then what you're going to tell the person is, hey, look, I just want to put it in writing. You could think of it as a more upscale, informal corrective action sort of thing. Now, because in this one, if you want to think about it, it's going to be a letter of expectation or a verbal warning. It's going to be just verbal. Nothing's going to happen there. You're going to still have some sort of record that you had a verbal warning, because the next one is going to be a written warning. So that's going to be the big difference. One is going to be a written warning, but that's later on more formal stuff. And then you have a verbal warning. The same thing is going to happen for the PIP. You want the person to know that, sure, what you're doing currently is not quite making it, you're not doing the right thing, but this is the first conversation we're having about this. We're not going to go into World War I about this thing when we could just have a small little conversation first. Don't blow it up before it's even a huge deal. What I mean is there are little steps. So the performance improvement plan is just going to be something simple. Okay, here's what you're doing. This is what you are supposed to be doing. Let's work on that. And that's it. Just keep it simple. For the verbal warning, it's just the same. I mean, all of them sort of go together hand in hand. So at the same time that you're giving them a verbal warning, you could be giving the performance improvement plan just so that they could have it. In some organizations, you're going to see the verbal warning is going to be the first thing. They're going to say, oh, by the way, don't do it anymore. But that may not go anywhere because there's nothing that you're attaching it to. But if you give a PIP with a letter of expectations, that is definitely going to give a message to the employee that you're serious. So by the time you're here in step number 2 for the corrective action for performance, you're going to realize that when you record the interaction, you're going to be able to put there all the steps that you took. And the most important thing after all that is that you're going to follow up with the employee. You could do all this stuff, all these steps, but if you don't follow up with the employee, it's as good as nothing, because the employee is going to figure out that you only do this as someone else pushes you. So if your district manager pushes you because the numbers were down, and then you talk to the employees, but you never followed up with them, well, it must not be that important when you didn't follow up with them. So that's what you're trying to avoid. So you need to follow up. And that's where a lot of the management drops the ball on that one for not following up. So you did all your follow-ups, you did everything that you were supposed to. You did all your work and you did the follow-up, but nothing changed. Then what? You did everything that you were supposed to keep the employee engaged, but still the results are not there. So there is another thing that you need to do. If no measurable progress is made, it's time to take more formal steps, which could lead to termination. Now, on the first and the informal portion of it, at no point was there anything mentioned about termination or any problems like that. It was just informal. It was just, let's try to make it better. You tried that portion. It didn't work. Nothing happened. So the only option that is available now, that is left really, is to take it more formal, which means that everything is going to be written down and a time frame, a detailed time frame is going to be added to it. So now you're going to be held accountable for doing something by a specific period of time. If not, something else is going to happen. So again, you are going to, on this case, you're going to escalate you're going to escalate to a letter of warning. So you went from a letter of expectations to a letter of warning. Now, in many places, this letter of warning is called just a simple written warning. It's a letter. And in that letter, it's going to specify the date in which we're having the conversation, the date of prior, or really comments of prior communication, the date by which whatever situation you are having is expected to be resolved, or measurable results are expected to be present. And if all that fails, the next step will be termination, dismissal. Now, the way that this works is normally you have a specific period of time between all these things. They may tell you, depending on the work, you have 60 days to turn this around. If in 60 days you don't do it, you're done. So that's as simple as that. Now, you may find through the process of the diagnosing the problem on phase 1 that maybe the position in which the employee is currently at doesn't quite fit the person. Now, remember in session 1 when we were saying that some managers and supervisors get into those positions, but they were not really, when you really think about it and when you see them, how they work, they should have never really been in that position. Well, the same thing happens to every single other employee. Now, they could go up to the ranks because they knew people. And now they are stuck in a position, they are not performing to their greatest potential, and they are just bringing the organization down or the unit down. So at that point, if you realize that that's the issue, a demotion could be the best thing that could happen to that employee, because the options could be losing their job or getting a demotion. Now, that's not an option that you're going to, you could technically give that option to the employee, but you pretty much don't really give them an option. You tell them, this is what we have. We have a demotion for you. If they say, oh no, I don't want that, well, there's nothing else. So that's it. You don't really tell them. You either get demoted or you get fired. They will realize that those are the options that you're giving them once you tell them that you're demoting them. Because if you are demoting them, the hope or the idea here, the goal, will be that you have realized that in this other position that they are being demoted to, potentially, they're going to be doing better. They are most likely going to be doing their numbers, and they're going to be more productive and potentially even happier on that position. So the demotion is not necessarily bad, because the demotion could be saving you from being fired, from being let go. Now, suspensions for performance, I'm not the greatest fan of it. The reason is, if you are not performing up to the standards, again, performance is based on numbers, on something that you need to achieve. And then you get suspended, well, you're definitely not going to make it now because you're not at work anymore. So even though it is an option, you could always have that ability there to suspend a person so they understand that you're serious. If it's performance-based, that might not be, in my opinion, the best thing. As we go on to the next one, you are going to see how that is totally different for the next corrective action process. But for this one, it may be sort of depending on the situation kind of thing. If everything else fails, the person needs to get fired, needs to get, put it nicely there, dismissed. But you have to let go of the person. You have tried everything. Now, the important thing with this is, and I cannot underline this or stress this more, is for legal purposes. The whole reason that we're doing these trainings, these 3 sessions, especially this last session, is for legal stuff. So you did everything you could for the employee. You bent backwards, you did whatever you could. The employee still didn't make it. You let go of the person. Great employee. A month later, you get a notice from court that you are being sued, the organization is being sued for letting the person go improperly. Now, if you don't have any of this paperwork, the chances are you will lose in court. And depending what they're suing for, they will get it. So this is why it's so important, whether it's informal or formal, to keep a record of the conversations of everything that you have been doing. If you have a detailed report of everything that has taken place and how you have tried to assist the person, then you should be okay. Even at that point, You have to make sure that everything makes sense. Don't make stuff up as it goes, because that will definitely come back and haunt you. So just make sure that if you are ready to dismiss a person, first of all, so if you have an HR department, they should be the ones making sure that you have all the paperwork, that the lawyers have looked at everything and that everything is good. As it has happened, you can have all the paperwork in the world. You lose it, or you misplace it, or you don't record it properly. Your HR department may turn around and say, even though you have said that this is what is going on, because you don't have proof, we cannot move on. We cannot tell you to go ahead because we don't have the proof, or you don't have the proof to show in case something were to happen. So the evidence in this case is the record of your conversations, of everything, even the informal portion of it, because that is definitely going to go a long way in case there is an issue later on. As we move on to disciplinary action, or in this case misconduct, you're going to notice that on phase 1, step 1, the diagnosed problem portion of it has the same information. You gathered, you observe, and you gather the data. Now the obvious issue here is that in this case we're not talking about performance. So in disciplinary action or misconduct, what we're trying to see is the behaviors that the person is having. It could be towards another coworker, a customer itself that is coming in, or even how they interact with you, with the management itself. I mean, you're a coworker after all. So again, the first step is going to be the same. You're going to observe and gather the data, pretty much the same way. In this case, you're going to be seeing the interactions, how they're dealing with the public, how they're dealing with your other employees, to see how that's working out. You're going to compare and observe the expectations, the same process. The only difference is that in this case, it's going to be the behavior, or more than anything, it's going to be how they're interacting with the people. Not so much the performance of the end result of the product that they're achieving, but the behavior of how they are dealing with other people. So they're going to look for possible causes. Is the person, which goes back to session 2. Now, session 2 and session 3 have a lot in common. In session 2, the issues were conflict resolution. Now that we're in session 3, corrective action has a lot to do with conflict resolution. You try to resolve the problem through conflict resolution, through whatever method you're using. If the problem doesn't get fixed, or the situation continues, now corrective action steps in. So it's a sequence. So you try one thing first, that doesn't work, then you move on to corrective action. Now, on session number 2, we were talking about bullying. Bullying will be an example of disciplinary action that needs to be addressed. That's something that is misconduct. So on session number 2, we were talking about the different steps. Now, when you are observing the person and gathering the data to diagnose a problem, if you notice that bullying is going on, automatically that's a red flag right there. That shouldn't be happening in the first place. So you have to design it. You have to tackle the problem and figure out if that's the only problem that this individual is having, or there are other issues that need to be addressed. So once you have all this information, ideally you're going to have that second person, just like when we were talking about performance, that is going to be serving as a second set of eyes and ears to make sure that you are not influencing your own decisions based on your prior experience with the individual. So it is very important to keep that. Remember, you are the detective. So before you confront the employee, you need to have the facts and be sure to understand the portions of the performance that is under the employee's control. Or in this case, it's going to be the behaviors that they are controlling themselves. You're the detective, so you have to see this part by yourself. And you don't want to be biased in your own investigation or detective work, if you want to put it that way. Okay, one of the big differences as you are working on this disciplinary action portion of it is that once you have all the facts, you have to convene a meeting with the employee just as the same as before, sort of let them know ahead of time, don't surprise them. The bigger difference is going to be, because we're talking about behavior, you're gonna make it personal. Do not make it personal. Make sure to use words that could not be interpreted as you attacking the person. Now, if a person is doing something that is either getting employees upset or coworkers upset or customers upset, you can tell the person in such a way that they're going to think or internalize it as you personally attacking the employee. Now, one of the ways that you could avoid that is by approaching it as some of the ways that you interact with the customers need to change. They may not be what we are expecting from you, and you move it to the expectation. So you're not going to say so much that you are doing this and you're doing that, but what you are definitely going to tell them is the expectations of your positions are not currently being met by the behaviors that you are showing. Technically, that's the same thing, but it's on a different way. Not nicer so much, but on a different way that is not going to be taken as a personal attack. Keep it to one of the things that you don't want that you want to make sure that you're doing properly is that whatever you're saying on this meeting is something that you observe firsthand, not what other people said, they witnessed or they heard. Now, this is going to be the case for little things that are creating problems, but are not going to be a situation of bullying. What I mean, if it's a case of someone's accusing another employee that they are bullying, okay, so that's going to be the witness. So you should be taking that into account when you're doing your observation, when you're putting everything together. But if it's more than anything gossip, that this person said that that person did this and did that, keep that apart. If you didn't experience it yourself, if you didn't see it, keep those things aside. When it's something more serious or an accusation, okay, so bring that information forward, and maybe even bring the person that brought up those cases. But keep it to something that you know. Don't use things that you don't know for sure how they actually took place. And just like before, you have to listen to the employee. Regardless of the situation, you have to give them a chance to explain whatever they're being either accused of doing or just to explain their behavior. You have to give them a chance, and you have to listen to them. And you have to actively listen, not just be there just as a soundboard and not doing anything. You have to actually listen to them. Just like before, you're going to make suggestions or recommendations. You have to realize whether the employee is taking ownership or passing the blame. Oh, I did that because this person did that, or just take ownership from it. Hold them accountable for their own actions. They have to realize that they are responsible for the actions they take, and they have to understand that their actions have effects on the organization as a whole, and depending on what they do is how the organization is perceived by the rest of the individuals. You have to check for agreement as well. Do they understand how this behavior is affecting how they need to change it? So you just make sure that you get that buy-in from the person. At the same time, you have to record the interaction, just as we mentioned before, especially for behavioral stuff. You have to make sure that you have a record of all the different situations that you have had with this person, because if worse comes to worse, you have to have something to back you up. Because in a court, it's not your word against their word is not going to go too far. But if you have paperwork to prove whatever you're saying, then you have a better chance at winning the case, if you want to put it that way, and getting your things straight. So just make sure to have everything recorded, and just as important as ever, you have to follow up. If a person is being accused of bullying, and you do all this stuff, you do all these steps, you record it, but then you never follow up with it, at this point, it's not going to be the person that is being accused of bullying, the one that you're going to have a problem with. Is a person that accused, or the accuser is going to be the one that might be taking you to court because you haven't done as an employer your due diligence of making sure that situation stops. So remember, work is supposed to be a safe environment for the most part. In the case I'm referring to employees. So you have to make sure that these employees are not being threatened, and it's a safe work environment. So this is very important, especially if you're not following up. You need to follow up, especially with serious accusations like bullying. So the part of following up, you did it. Congratulations, you did all your work there. But then you realize that the situation has not changed, or maybe it has even gotten worse, because since you stepped in, the person is acting out a little bit more. Now, misconduct could be anything. It could be from bullying, could be one extreme, to coming in late. It's behavior. It's stuff that is not performance-based. It's just either I'm coming in late, I'm leaving in early. The lunches, I'm taking 2-hour lunches instead of 1-hour lunch. And I'm wearing the right clothes. It could be anything. So once you get to that point and you have addressed it, then it comes to the next step. Again, limited to no improvement. So you have to escalate it to a letter warning or a written warning. You have to let them know that you're serious. Again, the first portion of the informal portion of this process is just should be something quick, just to let them know how things are, and that you are concerned, that you want them to do better. That's pretty much what that comes down to. Once it doesn't happen, then you have to be formal, and then you have to put it all in writing and get in a time frame. In X amount of time, this needs to change, otherwise we need to move to the next step, which could include termination. Now, the emotions here, depending, for example, in this case, I don't like the emotions here. It depends on the situation. If you are being late, it doesn't really matter that you are late being one position or another. You are most likely going to be late. Now, it will make a difference if the time that you're coming in will be different, but that's like we were talking in session 2, that will be more of a conflict resolution, and that you're going to get into some sort of arrangement to accommodate the person. But in this case, if you're already at this point, that means that most likely everything else failed and the person is still being late. So the emotion here may not quite work, unlike the emotions for performance. In that scenario, that actually I would recommend to do them, because it will be different. It's performance. In this case, this is disciplinary action. Some people do believe, and some practice, the idea that the emotions will work. I'm not one of them, but if you are, you go give it a try, and then just go based on your experience, and then let's see what happens with that. Now, suspensions, in this case, I do like the idea of suspensions. When we were talking about performance, I mentioned that performance may not be helped by you suspending the person, because it might actually make it worse, because the person is not going to be there and it's going to affect their performance. So depending on the position, of course. Now, suspension for disciplinary actions does make a little more sense, at least for me, because in this case, if the person is being late, they're going to realize, they're going to have an immediate realization that being late and being suspended is going to be it's going to be easier to link it, the suspension, and why the suspension is going to work better for misconduct. Now, the bullying thing, it may work as well. They're going to realize that they're going to have some time to be out of the organization, out of the office. They're going to have some time to think about it, to cool down, to whatever was happening, and they may be able to turn it around. So in my opinion, suspensions for conduct problems should be good. They should work, and you have to make sure that there's no retaliation for the person that is doing the accusing, if there was one person in the first place. But I mean not, but if a person was the one that caused the accusation to come up, and then you have to make sure that the person being accused is not retaliating against that person, especially if they get suspended. So you have to keep an eye out on that for. If everything else fails, again, dismissal. There's nothing wrong with dismissal. So one of the things that I learned very early on, when one of our organizations changed from one company to another, they got bought out. One of the first meetings that we got, I keep telling people all this all the time. Those managers came from the north. They had always been a west or the organization that was original to us had always been more calm, more laid back. So these new owners coming from the north, and one of the first meetings that we had, and when I'm in the north, I'm talking Chicago, New York, up there, and we're here in Florida. So this new company comes in, and one of the first things that come out of their mouths is, performance is very important to us, guys. And one of the things that we have learned to do over time is that we can do zeros without you. What does that mean? This is the first time we meet these people, and they tell us that they could do zeros without us. What that means is exactly this. If you're going to be causing me problems, if you're not going to be producing, if you're not going to be doing pretty much what you're supposed to, then we don't need you. For that, we don't have you here. We save the money on the whatever we're spending on you, and we still have the same results because we're not producing anything. So that's what it's come down to. At the end of the day, you have a business to run. If you're not doing what you're supposed to, you might as well be gone. I'll get someone else, or maybe not even. We don't even need a second person because the other employees are covering for you. So again, letting people go is not always a bad thing. Most of the time it's a good thing, because once you get to that point, it's actually going to be helping the organization, and other employees are going to realize that you're serious about whatever you're doing. So keep in mind that it's not one person. It impacts everyone else. As we're approaching the end of this session 3, I want to make sure that there is something, and again, it does vary from organization to organization, but most larger organizations are going to have this setup, this set. One is going to be, you're going to have 2 tracks. You're going to have the track that is going to be for corrective action, only for performance, and you're going to have the corrective action that is going to be for misconduct or disciplinary action. Now, there are going to be 2 parallel tracks that they're not going to cross over each other. So the way to think about it is, if the employee is having issues that have to do with misconduct, something disciplinary, you could potentially be in written warning on that one, on letter of warning, whatever you want to call it, meaning that you could potentially be fired at any point, and at the same time, you are the number 1 performer. Now, when that stuff like that happens is, you are not being fired or being let go in this case for performance, but you're being let go for discipline. The same thing happens. You might be the nicest person in the world, but you're not producing, so your performance is not there. And even if you're the best person, if you're not performing, you may be in written warning, letting you know if you don't increase your performance, you're going to be let go. Or you could be a crazy person if you want to think, not a crazy person, that's the wrong term. You want to be a person that is just there for the money. You could be potentially in written warning for performance and misconduct. Now, because they are separate tracks, most companies do treat them, because they're separate tracks, you could be fired for either one or both, but because you are on one doesn't mean that you'll get affected by the other one. So what I mean is, today you have a problem with performance, tomorrow you may have a problem with misconduct, and they are separate. They are going to be treated separately. The observations, everything that you're going to be doing is on a separate track. Eventually, when the person does get let go, which at that point, if you have issues on both sides, that would be one of those that you could do zeros without them and let them go. At that point, if there is an issue with the core, you may be able to provide all the information. Now, in many states, it's employment at will. Some places do have exceptions, but most of them, many of them anyway, are employment at will. You don't really have to provide any explanation as to why you let them go. But if you do provide one, just make sure that you have the information to back it up with. And if it's one of those states that has employment at will with exception, just make sure that whatever you're using is one of those exceptions. Is not one of those exceptions. So you don't want to be accused of being of a person for being discriminated against them because they couldn't do the work, and it just so happened that the person is an older person that is a protective class. So there are a lot of things that go into this. So what I want to kind of summarize everything together is that you have to understand which track to follow, performance or disciplinary. Whichever one you follow, they are parallel, but they don't quite the same, so they're different. You need to know when to escalate the process, and you need to know when to dismiss the person, the employee. Now, that's probably one of the toughest things that you're ever going to do, but it's something necessary. And unfortunately, once you do it once or twice, you sort of get a little used to it, especially if you know that you did everything that you could. Now, if you didn't do everything that you could in order to help the employee and save the employee from being let go, then you didn't do your job as a manager. But if you know that you did everything possible and it still didn't work, well, it's not on you, it's on the employee. And so I just want to give, as we finish these 3 sessions, a quick summary of what we have done so far. So at the beginning of session 1, one of the things that I mentioned is that hopefully, most of you guys knew everything that entailed to be a manager. Now, I think I said something to the extent of, if I knew them what I know now about being a manager, maybe I wouldn't have taken this position. Now, we have spent a few hours on this, a few sessions, 3 sessions to be exact, on this. And many of you may not have known that all this is what involves to be a manager. Now, there are a lot of responsibilities in this position, and most of them are not going to get any easier, because the more time you spend, the more things you learn, and the more things you learn, the more things you are responsible for making sure that everything is working. So it's just going to be easier in the sense that you're going to be more experienced, but at the same time, you have to be on top of everything. So the first session was supervisor. Who is a supervisor? How do you remain as a supervisor? And again, the idea on that one was to be an effective supervisor. You don't want to be just a supervisor. You want to be an effective supervisor, one that is making a difference. Then we moved on to conflict resolution. That was session number 2. And pretty much on that one is how to handle situations, conflicts in this case, and what are the different steps. Now, one of the things that we notice on conflict resolution is that you have to be consistent in how you handle them. You cannot be good today with something and tomorrow you could go crazy with it. You have to be very consistent. Most of those problems, many of them anyway, could get resolved by being consistent. And corrective action is the one that we just finished right now. Corrective action is pretty much record keeping. You have to make sure that when you do these conflict resolution issues, that you are keeping a track of everything. Then you move it over to corrective action if nothing gets resolved. And over time, you have to have a record of all the employees. Everyone is going to have a file for a reason. Just make sure that there is something inside the file. Even if it's good or bad, whatever it is, especially if it's good, make sure that it's there. But definitely if it's bad, it must be there. Because if something does happen, the organization and you are going to be held liable for not doing your part. So I hope that this helps with the knowledge, that it answers some of your questions for who's a supervisor and how to work as a supervisor. I want to thank you for taking the time to accompany me through this session, through these 3 sessions. If you have any questions, my information is at your desk there. I gave you my business card so you could get in touch with me. You could always email me or whatever you want. Just ask me any questions. And if you're watching this online after some time that we have recorded this presentation, you could just put a comment. As soon as I see it, I'll reply to it and we could get in touch with them. So again, I want to thank you for taking the time. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Thank you again. And I almost forgot to tell you the conclusion of the anecdote. After I had already said it 3 times to the district manager that I will talk to the person, and I will just retrain them. Pretty much the district manager stopped him and says, if you don't take any corrective action and you document it, then you're going to be wasting your time and the employee is going to realize that you are not as serious as when you actually write it down and put it on a piece of paper. Up to that point, I didn't think much of it. And again, it may have been because I didn't know better and I was being trained. But from that moment on, I realized, and it is true, it does make a difference when you say something to an employee and you put it in paper and you give it to them. Once they could feel something, when they have something that they could carry, that they could hold, that becomes real for them. So you definitely have to have the talk, but definitely make sure that you put it in writing and you give something to them. Again, thank you all.